Welcome back to another video lecture for AP World History. This one is on revolutions during the time period of about 1750 to 1900s. This is one of the most exciting periods for me personally. Why? Because so much changed so quickly in the ideological world of Europe and, to be quite honest, the rest of the world. What happened to make this such a radical period of change? Well, a few things are really important. First, Europeans had expanded out into the Western Hemisphere and they brought back a ton of silver, especially from Mesoamerica. This new currency made it possible for Europeans to invest in more luxurious goods like paintings and silk and ornaments for their homes. This new trade led to the rise of a new merchant class, and that class is going to challenge the monarchs. Second, the Protestant Reformation had challenged the Catholic Church's authority. Now, that does not mean that the Protestants had given up on authority, tradition, or hierarchy. In some ways, they even made these stronger. But their claim that the individual should go to the Bible and read it for him or herself provided a new dose of individualism that undermined the Catholic Church's argument that the community of authorities should be most important. Third, new discoveries in science led to a challenge to the old ways of looking at things. The big scientific discoveries came from Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler. They would challenge the idea that the Earth was at the center of the universe. And this had an even greater challenge to the Catholic Church's claim that the Earth was at the center of God's creation, thus again, undermining authority. So all of this leads into new revolutions of thought, and those revolutions would have massive impacts in societies like America, France, and Haiti, and for the issues of gender and women in society. So let's start looking at these revolutions in thought. The new ideas and how we gather information are based upon certain what we call categories of thought. I know, these are going to be big words, so hang with me on this. First, there's what's called cosmology. This refers to the study of where the cosmos or the universe comes from. Second, there's something called ontology. This is about asking what our nature is. And third, there's epistemology. This asks how we gather information. Last up, there's something called teleology. That asks whether or not we have a purpose, and if we do, what it is. Okay, let's look at some of the big thinkers of this time period. Our first person is René Descartes. He is famous for asking that question about how we exist. It's a great ontological question. He eventually said this thing, "I think, therefore I am." He meant that the very fact that we could ask such a difficult question means we must exist. And this means that we are rational beings with the capacity to ask tough questions and seek out answers. After Descartes, another great thinker of the period was Immanuel Kant. He asked how we know about things and if we even need religion to help us out. Notice this is kind of a combination of ontological, epistemological, and teleological questions. Kant said all humans think, and we all have consciousness. With this consciousness, we can create universal rules like no one should steal, or we should tell the truth, or we should never murder an innocent person. In other words, Kant argued that our common rationality allows us to create moral rules for everyone, and we don't really need the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, Catholic authorities to tell us this. Kant's arguments were a part of what's called the rationalist tradition. But there was also a tradition called empiricism. I know, big word, but it's kind of like science. The idea was promoted by John Locke. Locke argued that humans do have rationality, but our rationality is created and conditioned by our environment, or our empirical surroundings. We have to observe these, and then we can come to conclusions. Locke argued that if we observe our surroundings, we come to the conclusion that all humans intuitively want certain rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of private property. And the governments ought to protect these. In other words, humans can use their reason to figure things out, and we create governments to then protect us. Next up, there's Voltaire. Voltaire picked up on all these movements and asked, if institutional religion played any role in this. He argued that using our reason, we could see that religions had just created myths and stories to control us. But using our reason, we could come to find the true laws of nature. Okay, one more individual, or really two individuals. So far, note that all the individuals in the Enlightenment rebellion were men. Not too surprising, given that women at the time were not really allowed to have a higher education. But two brilliant women changed this. There was Mary Wollstonecraft and Olympe de Gouges. Both argued that women, like men, had rational abilities. But due to the power that men had wielded, women had been defined as emotional, fragile, and incapable of intellectual pursuits. Wollstonecraft and de Gouges both argued that if women were given the same opportunities as men, they too would demonstrate the ability to reason, innovate, and challenge received assumptions. Okay, next up are the actual revolutions. So all these revolutions in thought led to real revolutions in society. Take the American Revolution. The American colonists challenged the British mercantile system. They didn't really argue that taxes were the problem. They argued that Britain had not given them the representation and local power to have input on policies that affected them. In other words, the American Revolution was a Lockean revolution, based upon the belief that Britain had violated the rights of Americans to have true liberty. In France, the revolution was far more radical. There were two phases to the revolution. France had fallen into debt due to the mercantile wars, and there was a shortage of bread leading to starvation. The French Parliament, or Estates General, was stacked in favor of the nobles and priests. So the commoners formed a national assembly to create a constitutional monarchy. But the revolution then turned radical. A revolutionary named Robespierre used the belief that government itself was the problem. The best way to create a society was to radically recreate it altogether, based upon reason, equality, and brotherhood. His revolution led to the terror, or the use of the guillotine, to get rid of the nobles, the king, and the church. In the end, Robespierre himself was guillotined, and the person who put the French society back in order was General Napoleon, who became the next French emperor. Okay, next up is Haiti. Haiti was a part of the French mercantile empire. The island was primarily used for slave labor and production of sugarcane. The island actually had large plantations owned by people called the Grands Blancs, or the big white owners, freed colored people, and then the Petits Blancs, the small white landowners. And then there were the black slaves. Toussaint Louverture, one of the freed black individuals, followed the French Revolution. He demanded freedom for all people. His original revolution worked to kick out the Grands Blancs and establish Haiti as a free black-led island. However, when Napoleon came to power, he reinstated slavery. He took back the island, and Louverture himself was taken prisoner back to France. Napoleon's forces, however, began to suffer from yellow fever, and they could not hold on to the island, so Napoleon left. And then General Dessalines, the second in charge after Louverture, took over, making Haiti once again a free black island. However, France and America would boycott the island because they had this fear that very possibly Haiti could become a model for other black rebellions around the world. Okay, last up is the women's rights movement. This is best represented in America. The first wave of feminism, or what's called suffragism, advocated for women's rights to vote. At Seneca Falls in New York, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton led a conference to create the Declaration of Sentiments. There they called for the right to vote, as well as to hold property, attain higher education, and in some cases to divorce their husbands. So what are our takeaways from all this? The period of 1750 to 1900 was really a revolutionary period. This means it followed the following things. Number one, new ideas were formed as societies moved away from basic economic stability. This is because merchants can now challenge the power of the king. Number two, new ideas challenged the authority of the monarch and religious leaders. And number three, these new ideas led to actual real rebellions based upon the desire for individuals to have rights and to have a say in government and society. In other words, that old order of filial obligations and hierarchy, it's getting a bit of a dose of a challenge. Okay, I'll see you in class.